So, I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art chick. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement from our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any nude life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at the local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So from my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course, and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting, and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident, and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 p.m., and it was pretty dark by the time that I got out. So, 4 weeks of walking there and back, uneventful. The 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. The 5 minutes at that bus stop, freaky as hell. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops, and it's always pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So, I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside of the shelter because I'm smoking. And obviously, I don't want to be a dick and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there were only a few minutes left until my bus, and I'm minding my own business when this guy comes up and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit on my personal space here close. Like, literally, I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s, and just had that general creepy vibe, and looked really grubby and disgusting. So obviously, I'm a bit freaked out and I sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. By this point, I'm like, okay, so he's trying to freak me out and he knows that I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I don't know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or in their own conversations. I guessed it must just have been that. 23-year-old me is so pissed off at what an idiot I was for just shrinking away from him. This was before I had a few more similar experiences that have shaped my loud-ass radical women's rights advocacy. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I let this creep stand and push his dick up against me, probably for the same reason we all allow this shit. I don't want to overreact. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. Please note that I am no longer afraid. And so anyways, it gets worse. After dodging the creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow motion, finally this bus comes around the corner. Now, I might not have reacted properly, but I'm not stupid. I know that if I get on the bus before this guy, he's gonna sit next to me, which is what I needed to avoid. So politely, I gesture and say, after you. He gives me that creepy look again and says, no, you go first. I insist, but he refuses again. There's a big queue now and I don't want to hold anybody up, so reluctantly, I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are in pairs, so there's no way that he can sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty. So where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. Great. So I'm just sitting there trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. So don't ask me why, but at the time, my phone would let me call my mom. But whenever I tried to text her, the sending bar would just stick. I don't know if anyone else has had this on iPhone, but when the little green bar at the top gets to about 90% of the way, it just sticks. That happened literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening, and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road. So my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told to her. Now, I had been on this bus for about 15 to 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. But I had never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, when my mom called, I just said to her, "I'll be getting off in about 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me." As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across as he walks past. He stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on freaking out a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact that he had pressed the button as soon as I had confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he intended on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day, I was the only one. So I sat on a bench and had one headphone in and one headphone out, so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy. But after a few minutes, 2 big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park, and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text message to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and 2 guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses though. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and a nod and then looked away. And then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some, do you want some? And then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way that he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. And then number 1 asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here, sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me more questions, but before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I need anything. He even stated he would give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on to report it. So I took it and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and it picked me up. As soon as I got on it, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me but thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick up the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did campus security. They were sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the two men earlier, their car, and the questions that the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. And then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, and so he did. It was on speaker and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it had been burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he had said this, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off, and then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone had clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police, and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hallway. I could hear everything they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me that it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, and mom and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by the two guys. The other kids had stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had these same officers there and had me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out so fast, and they were caught. It was in fact those two guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through much worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. So I just moved to New York back in July from Mississippi, and hadn't had any problems until January. So I go to a high school that's maybe 10 minutes driving away from my house, and I take the bus every day to and from school. Usually, my mom will pick me up from the bus stop and take me home, and I usually only have to wait like a minute or two. But this day, I was waiting for like 10 minutes, and I called her a couple of times and she didn't answer. So I assumed that she had fallen asleep, like she does sometimes. So, I decided to walk home. I usually go in a straight line for 3 streets and then make a right and walk straight down from there. On this day, I was wearing a tank top with a jacket on, Batman pajama pants and old school style Vans. The perfect outfit for walking in the snow, right? Anyways, as I'm walking straight down, I see a man who is in front of me, and walking the same way as me, so I take the right turn early, as I can just walk that way, but it just involves a couple of more turns. Because I like to be cautious when dealing with other people on the street, especially if I'm alone. So as I'm walking down and starting to make the right turn, I see the man is now walking the opposite way he was before, and is now walking towards me, which sets off some red flags in my head immediately. This guy is probably 5'11" to 6 foot tall, wearing a black beanie, a tan jacket, and blue jeans. And I'm a very small girl, 5'2", so I knew that if he wanted me, he definitely had a high chance of getting exactly what he wanted. So I naturally start walking faster than I already was and turn as he's probably 10 yards away from me, and I'm walking really fast straight down. I'm walking for about 5 minutes, turning around to check and see if he had made the turn after me, and I didn't see him until the last time I turned around. He made the turn and he was walking straight for me. So I start speed walking, while I'm also on the verge of a panic attack, and all adrenaline is kicked in, and then so does he. I stay at the same speed for a couple minutes, so I don't tip him off and let him know that I can see he's following me. After that couple of minutes, I see my house, and I just book it to my house and turn around to see him running after me. I finally make it to my house, and just start crying as soon as I get inside the door. So one Sunday afternoon, I was waiting at the bus stop alone after an outing with a friend at the mall. The bus stop was at the final stop for all the buses, so there were many buses coming and going and staying. I saw a bus driver get onto the bus and asked if he was a 14, and he said that he wasn't going to be driving, so I said okay and patiently waited for my bus. A few minutes later, I saw him get into a bus. He made eye contact with me. I think he was wearing sunglasses, and then he gestured with his hand to come to him. So, me trying to be nice and being a kind person, I did just that. He told me to take off my mask because he couldn't understand me when I tried to talk. He then proceeded to tell me how beautiful I am, and how I was such a rare beauty, and how he's never seen anyone as beautiful as me before, and who gave me these gleaming eyes and so on. I am used to guys who are significantly older than me hitting on me, because I am well aware that I am pretty, and I look 18, so I generally like to inform them that I'm 15, and they tend to leave me alone after that. But this guy didn't seem to care one bit that I had just turned 15, and continued to flirt even though he was 26. He proceeded to make sexual comments about my body, and kept looking at my chest. He was about my height. I'm 5 feet tall. After 10 minutes of conversation, he asked me about my sex life, and I had enough, so I texted my mom to call me. When I was on the phone with her, I was getting off the bus and he grabbed my hand. I yanked it away from him and got off, feeling sick. We went to the police station to report it, and I had to do a confrontation. Basically, they brought him in with 0 warning, and I had to tell him or confront him. He argued like a 7-year-old, and I actually got him to confess in 6 minutes. But please, let's not meet again.